All right. Our guest today personifies real men eat plants. He can cover your six on a battlefield, fix you up in a medical crisis, teach you how to get strong at the gym, and even cook you up some deliciousness in the kitchen. Now, he had to maintain his plant-based lifestyle under what I think are the toughest tests: Army basic training, Army Ranger training, and even during a deployment to Afghanistan. His new book is called Dead Meat: The Future of Food is Killer. It just came out yesterday, and it's just one of actually many books that you can find from him. Please welcome to the Real Men Eat Plants podcast, Sgt Vegan Bill Muir is here. So
thank you. Thank you for the applause, both real and
yeah, I love it. So Bill, I think we've talked a little bit going back and forth, on emails and stuff like that. I was in the Army. In fact, I did the Army thing in like the mid-'90s, early to mid-'90s. I did some Ranger training at Fort Leonard Wood. It's actually the Ranger Challenge back when I was in ROTC. Then did my basic AIT. My permanent duty station was Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And I got to tell you, I can't imagine doing any of this as a straight vegan. Now, especially back in the day. I don't know if it changed when you ended up going through. How the hell did you accomplish this, Sergeant?
Well, here's the thing, and a plug for the military. Unlike probably whatever, at least from my experience in the Army, nobody's going to force you to eat a certain thing. Now, I've heard anecdotal stuff about the Marine Corps, so that might be different. I'm sure the Chair Force and the Coasties are not going to do that. No one's forcing you to do anything. The problem was, it'd say like, all right, recruits. Unfortunately, like we had said earlier, they didn't curse at us. I think I would have appreciated that more. But they were like, all right, have at it, make something happen. And chow hall, but being vegan meant that 90% plus of what was there, I couldn't eat. So, for example, breakfast, there's a chow line that has bacon, eggs, sausage, pancakes. So I go through that, couldn't eat anything. So what they would have is a cereal. I guess you would call it a cereal bar. Not really that. It was just dry cereal. And cornflakes is vegan, so I ate dry cornflakes for weeks. There was no soy milk, hemp milk. Now, I think some of that has changed. I think they now have some of that, but I would just eat dry cereal. Eventually, I upgraded to putting fruit cocktail on it and have a salad sandwich, meaning 2 pieces of bread and some lettuce for lunch.
Jeez. I'm actually wondering, how do you do this with, like, MREs, though? Like, they would give us MREs out in the field, and so that was hard.
So that was very hard. But, again, there's 2 vegetarian MREs. I would usually get one of those thrown to me, and I just wouldn't eat the entree. I would have to do one of my, I think I'm allowed 2 F-bombs in the show. We use the term rat fuck, meaning I would go through the MRE, I would get what I could eat, and then I would probably try to go through another MRE and find what I could eat. Usually in the vegetarian MRE, I could eat the crackers, the wheat snack bread, peanut butter, and some fruit mush, and then I would be on to my next one. We need to have a vegan MRE. Like, I think most people agree, if we can feed prisoners vegan meals, I think we should be allowed to feed our soldiers and airmen.
It sounds a bit torturous, but I have to ask, because I'm sure you've turned plenty people vegan since. How about when you were out in the field? I mean, your comrades there.
People found it amusing, but most people, when you're in a situation of suck, most people aren't like, hey, what I'm currently doing kind of sucks. I see what you're doing sucks worse than what I'm doing. Let me get some of that extra suck. Nobody wants that. Nobody's like, so from either being in the field, which like 2 weeks of sitting around, or going training, and then all you have to look forward to is food, and I'm not eating it. That's not really an appealing thing. And, Afghanistan, too, we had some time to sit around and bullshit. People weren't like, hey, we're in a daily stressful environment. I see that you're even more stressed because while we're just worried about bullets and bandages, you're like, what am I going to do to fuel all this? And like, nobody's asking for extra stress. However, I think there were a lot of interesting conversations that were made. Some of them, some anecdotes would be funny to mention. I mean, a lot come to mind that are hilarious. Not necessarily every one of them is like best for promoting veganism. I mean, it's maybe they're funny and ironically.
Well, and so kind of along the lines of all the topics we're talking about, you know, when we have a lot of different guests that we have on the show, and you know, kind of one thing leads to the other, and one of the connections that we have is a Switch for Good podcast, and you know, Dotsie and Alexandria. So, you know, you were on their podcast, and you had mentioned just kind of like preparedness in the field, you know, carrying different, you know, fruits and seeds and nuts and stuff of that nature. And that makes me think, you know, obviously there's a level of preparedness that you need to have to do that. Were you ever in like Boy Scouts or anything like that? Because obviously that's a thing they're teaching you there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how much. I think the thing that helped me most in the military, well, being in shape, because I went in shape, and I think people would have given me a lot more flack for being vegan if I was vegan and weak or vegan and sickly, which I think was popular media. What
for sure,
thought vegan was a long time ago. When we'll even remove people. When drill sergeants, drill instructors, other people saw the vegan tattoo on my back, it all just didn't compute for most people. It was just like, you know, they thought vegan was going to be sick, you know, on death's door, can't hack any of this. And there's this like heavily tattooed, maybe the only thing they would have put together is they thought vegan was wacky. I'm wacky. You know, vegan's still wacky. I don't know.
Maybe you're still a little wacky, and that's okay. You know, I have a buddy. I didn't serve with him in the Army. I met him afterwards. We stay in touch on Facebook. About a year ago, he had a heart attack. Now, he's recently been, within the last month, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I have been trying to tell him, hey, why don't you just start by maybe watching The Game Changers, maybe watch Forks Over Knives, maybe pick up a book here and there. He won't hear it at all. He's asking about medicines and wanting to go down that road. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, man, I mean, this is like a path to death. I mean, you are a father. You are a husband. You got things that you should do. My message is falling on deaf ears. Well, when you hear a story like that, especially for a guy, you know, a former Army guy who thinks of himself as a tough guy, a man's man, got to eat meat. It's associated with it. How do you talk to those kind of people? I'd love to break through. I don't know if I can. I don't know if it's a thing. But when you hear a story like that, Sergeant, I mean, what do you think? What thoughts cross your mind? What would be your message?
Usually, well, I work for the VA. I'm an RN at the VA, and most of the people there, as you would guess, are not super hippie types. And so I think talking to people, it's all about trying to meet people where they are and not trying to, you know, pull somebody over to a spot where there's no way that they're going to possibly understand it. And just, you know, like type 2 diabetes, say like, hey, type 1 diabetes, juvenile diabetes, you're born with it. It's just one of those things. It sucks. You know, hey, it's the mystery of life. Not everything is perfect and awesome. Type 2 diabetes is almost the diabetes that you choose. You have gotten to that place because you have eaten so poorly and been unable to figure out what you're doing so bad that your body is trying to hit eject. And at a certain point, you should take responsibility for your life. You could use the term as a man. It'd be better to say as a person, especially if you're someone that doesn't think that the government needs to step in for everything. So like, hey, personal responsibility. You got yourself in this spot. You get yourself out of it. It's a very clear way to do that. Eat less processed food. Eat plant-based. Even better, eat whole foods plant-based. But, I mean, my aunt has type 2 diabetes. We've been talking to her about this for years, for literal years. But, you know, at a certain point, not everyone is going to listen. And, you know, maybe it's just going to always be that way. You know?
And you say that the simplicity of it, and we talk a lot about that, like why not just see the facts of 1 + 1 = 2? And I'm looking behind you at your new book. And I was so intrigued by reading what it's about. It's fiction, yet is it? You know what I mean? Kind of like one of those, someday will we ever get to some horrible point? Tell our listeners and viewers what that's about, dead meat.
Sure. Well, the plot, to kind of distill it all down, the year is 2050. Due to yet another plague that's run rampant through our country and the world, suddenly all animals and all insects die. And people are left with one of two options: eat plant-based, or you're going to have to find a new source of meat. And what do people do? Well, the elites figure out a lottery program, not to give too much away, about how to start harvesting humans in slaughterhouses. And obviously there's parallels to how people could eat anything they want, just not an animal, and people are still choosing, like, how can we make it better for the environment to kill these animals? How can we make it, safer for us to drink their milk? It's like, hey, dumbasses, how about you just not eat the animals in the first place? And when people say, oh, it would never get to this point, people, it's just like, dude, it's been this way for a long time. We haven't needed to eat. We never needed to eat animals, but we've done it anyway, and we've ruined our planet and our health as a result of it. So,
no, and it's funny because it's obviously what you're talking about with the plot of that book. I mean, it's kind of like stems from real life things that we're seeing, and I was listening to that Joe Rogan, Aaron Rodgers podcast yesterday. And they kind of were bringing up the movie I, Robot and how that was like, it seemed like when it came out, it was like, oh, that's funny because, that'll never happen. And, in some ways we're kind of getting there with robotics taking over. And I'm just thinking about the kind of guests that he has on his show, the type of guests we have on our show. Is there anybody that you have come across and met in your lifetime that just had that personality that you're like, damn, like that's someone that I really want to like get into their mind and learn more about?
I mean, as far as childhood idols, I've always thought Rollins and Ian MacKaye and all those guys and gals that started basically punk rock. I think those it's weird. Like my heroes are people like that. David Goggins, Clint Eastwood. It's a really weird, like cherry picked across what they did. Sometimes throwing away like the political ideology that I'm not really down with and in favor of. Like Clint Eastwood's movies, I love. I'm not really sure if I would really agree with them.
Right.
If we sat down and talked about the state of America, Goggins is amazing, but I don't know how you'd be able to explain veganism to him. I don't think, he might not be able to, understand it the same way. I think people like Joe Rogan are amazing for what they do. I think they're going to always find some kind of interesting way around just not eating animals. Probably because it's just on brand for him to do
for
that.
Sure.
If he ever was to say you don't need to eat animals, I think he would lose a lot of money, unfortunately. And I think if he ever, actually like leaned into what he probably knows is the truth.
Which is interesting because he's the type of guy that's going to go into the details and look into certain topics and kind of stir the pot, if you will, and dig into things that you hadn't thought about. So it's interesting you bring that up because he's not exactly chanting rah rah about veganism, but he's got to.
But I think he has an amazing platform, and I think he does a lot of great things. I know on the left and right, there's talking points in it. It's always like one side of the spectrum or the other. Whereas I think someone like him, yeah, there's great points about what he does, and a lot of stuff is really interesting, and a lot of his guests are interesting. Do I think he kind of makes stuff up sometimes? Sure, but I mean, probably everyone does. To be fair to him,
speaking of, go ahead, Sergeant. I'm sorry to cut you off there.
I was going to say he's had a lot of my like unknown heroes too, like Ray Capo, who started the band Youth of Today, which one of the first American, I guess you could say, rock bands to promote vegetarianism back in the late 80s, and he had him on the show. I mean, now unfortunately, now he's more into this Hare Krishna stuff, which, I mean, it's a religion, whatever. But I think for being like way ahead of his time, like Ray Cappo was definitely doing something interesting, and it was cool that Joe Rogan had him on the podcast. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you were talking about one side of a spectrum or the other. So dead meat, I think, is on one side of the spectrum. Then you got on the other side of the spectrum, the Adventures of Sgt Piggy. I think is on the exact other side. How the heck? This is quite the dichotomy here. How the heck do you go from one to the other? And if you could give us a little insight into Sgt Piggy.
So Sgt. Piggy came about because the pandemic was just so depressing, and I wanted a little bit of light in all that darkness. You could say dead meat basically gobbled up the darkness and became like the worst form of the darkness. I don't know, whatever metaphor. But Sgt. Piggy was meant to be the light in the darkness. I have nieces and nephews. I was like, man, while I'm writing books, I'd love to write a book like that they would love. I just written Vegan Strong before that, and obviously like 5-year-olds aren't going to get much out of that. But the Vegan Strong or Sgt. Piggy came about as a result of I made an animated, cartoony commercial for Vegan Strong, and they were so taken by it, and they were just like, "Show us the vegan pig." I don't think that they really understood much of what was in the commercial, other than it was an animated pig in camo talking about veganism. And so I wrote The Adventures of Sgt. Piggy for them, and they loved it. And when I did I started looking around bookstores, the internet, on what vegan books for kids were like, and they were all just depressing, sad, sobby, like awful, in my opinion. Like, life is wonderful, and there's no reason to talk to a 3-year-old about awfulness and stuff. It should only be how fun and everything is. So I thought, well, if I could just throw a little bit of, like, vegan, not really propaganda, but, kids are not down with hurting animals at that age. So it wouldn't really end up being that much propaganda-y. Is that even a word?
Close enough. Yeah, I know exactly what you meant. No, but it is, kids, it's kind of funny that way. You could take them to a dairy farm. They can meet cows and baby calves and then try to explain to them when you get home that you're feeding them veal, which, by the way, is just one of those dead baby cows, And really, kids can draw that parallel and say, I'm not going to eat this. I don't want to eat a dead baby cow. And it's the cognitive dissonance of adults, though, that will just be like, okay, whatever. Adults can say, I love animals and have cats and dogs as pets, but not have met a pig, who, by the way, make really great pets and are really affectionate and really smart, and not draw that parallel to say, like, okay, why am I not eating this animal, but I will eat this animal when they're both sentient beings with personalities that form bonds, that have intelligence? And I keep thinking to myself, what is the message that we're missing? Because I kind of like the approach you have. Like, Vegan Strong is one kind of book, and it's nonfiction. Then you got Dead Meat, which is fiction. Then you attack it from an angle like The Adventures of Sgt. Piggy. It seems to me you're throwing a bunch of messages out there, and hopefully one of them is going to resonate. Is that on target by me saying that?
Well, I call it those 3 books are what I'm calling the Vegan Trilogy. I thought when I started this whole thing, I was like, what could I add to the whole vegan conversation, the whole conversation about eating animals that hasn't been done? And so at first I was like, well, I'll take all the hippie propaganda out of veganism and write a field manual for going vegan, and that's what Vegan Strong is. And then I was like, well, let me see what they have for kids, because I really, want to do something for my nieces and nephews. And then when I saw that just being super stoked about life and being vegan was something I just didn't see out there, which I thought that was crazy that kind of book didn't exist. And so I was like, okay, so that's what Adventures of Sgt. Piggy is. And lastly, I thought, okay, let me just cram all the negativity and this is now 30 years of being vegan this month. I guess maybe you could also say the anger at people for destroying the planet and killing animals for no reason, and just like put it all into one spot. That's what Dead Meat is.
Well, and obviously, 30 years of being vegan it's something is connecting and resonating with you and you're sticking with it. And, kind of to go back to your history a little bit, you were living, if I'm not mistaken, living in Japan when you got word about 9/11. Now, 9/11 aside, though, I'm curious about your travels, if you've lived all over the world and just living away from the United States. What did that do to, establish veganism in your mind, or kind of like learning different things from outside of what we hear in the States?
I think what living abroad has done is definitely expanded my mind about what life is, what life could be, what daily life has to look like. So I've lived in 4 different countries. Here, I'm going to count Afghanistan because I was living there for a year. Italy, I was there for a year and a half, and Japan for 8 years. I think basically it doesn't really necessarily change what veganism is for me, though being in Japan and having been vegan constantly questioned anyway too in the 90s made me, I had the choice. I could either double down on it and do it no matter what, or I could say, oh, okay, I'll eat something with some dashi, with some fish broth, or I'll do something this because it's easier. And I chose I'm doubling down, I tripled down on it no matter what. So I think bringing this back to the military, it made it easier in some ways because I had to be resourceful for so long. I'd eaten tofu sandwiches in some instances, which for those who don't know what that is, you take fried tofu, 3 ingredients: fried tofu, 2 pieces of bread, ketchup.
Yummy.
I don't recommend it though. You can make anything better. If you had lightly toasted the bread, just fried the tofu with some kind of almost garnish like a tomato aioli, you could probably make that really, really delicious. If it was like a ciabatta bread, it would be insane. However, this was just at a Japanese gas station.
When you're desperate, the peanut butter and jelly, right? Something I wanted to ask too is, for the sake of this podcast and the potential vegans out there, or even vegetarians, what would you say, or what piece of advice can you give other than the really obvious stuff? Well, we've got a lot of people joining. Maybe this is their first time listening. What would you want them to know?
So you're going to hear some stories about people, especially the longer someone has been vegan, the more horror stories there are. You don't need to have any of those stories of your own. This is all stuff that happened in the past. So I think there's some times where people like me and some people who have been vegan for 20 years, 10 years, whatever, want to have this, when I was vegan back in the day. This stuff is meant to be irrelevant. This should not have a connection with anyone's life, other than the only thing that you should learn out of a story like that, of me eating cornflakes dry for a meal or whatever, is at one point, people didn't really think this was worth doing. So it was hard to do, but now it is. And more average people are getting on board with it. And it should be easier and easier to the point where it should never, ever be a thing. Really, the thing about veganism is it's just the thing about getting food from any food source. Calories is fuel. You need to get enough fuel. As long as you get enough calories from a variety of food sources, you're going to be fine. Now, should those be higher quality food sources? Sure. If you think of your body as an automobile, you need to put the right gas in it, or in my case with one of my electrics, the right electric charge for it to go. If you don't do that, your automobile won't operate correctly. I think when you see podcasters and influencers and people are always trying to come up with the new it thing, 3 foods to avoid, 5 things you need to eat now, try this diet. Nothing new is being created. You don't need to buy a new book or a new this or a new that or change. It's all been already done. the main thing is to get enough calories, and you're going to be fine. Now, you could play around with your, as you know, macros. You could say, okay, I'm getting most of my calories from protein versus carbs and stuff like that. But yeah, your brain is going to run better on carbs. Always remember that. You're going to need fat as well. You know?
The basics.
Hey, yeah, absolutely. Keeping it simple is great. And before we let you go, I got to ask you about the 30th anniversary tour and also vegan road trip. If you could, I'm kind of picturing you as like the vegan Anthony Bourdain. Is that right? Is that
there you go?
I mean, that's how I would love it to be. You know, sometimes I think it is like that. Like pre-pandemic, I've traveled to 47 countries.
Wow.
And been vegan through those all. So, you know, whether I was in India or Egypt or Cambodia or wherever, finding vegan stuff and putting it on the internet. The last couple of years, you know, obviously it's just been a pandemic suckfest. I'm hoping that once things lighten up, I'm going to get back to traveling around. I want to go back to Japan and film some stuff there. As far as the 30th anniversary tour, it's still being planned right now. I believe Tampa Bay, Bench Fest, and I'm going to say there's one in Tennessee that are confirmed. But I'm going to have to let you guys know about that because I'm still working that out.
Absolutely. Definitely keep us updated. And the book, again, is Dead Meat. The Future of Food is Killer. There it is. Sergeant, tell us where we can buy it, where we can find you on, online, social media, all that kind of stuff, please.
Sure. Thank you very much for asking. So I'm easily findable at Sgt Vegan. That's SGT_vegan on the gram, SGT space vegan on Facebook, or SGT Vegan on,
is that Twitter?
SGTvegan.com, SGTvegan.com.
There's a bunch of them.
I think I have the Twitter handle too. I just never really used it. I'm sorry, Twitter. And Dead Meat, I think it's best searchable if you add my name, Bill Muir, next to it, because weirdly there's a lot of dead meats, though I don't think they have anything to do with dead animals. You know, it's all zombie.
Right. all excellent stuff. Hey, Sergeant, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. Good luck with the tour, with the book, everything you got going on. We absolutely love it. Again, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks. Really appreciate you.